Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me at the Horses Advocate podcast. Welcome back. If you're a new visitor, welcome to the attempt of me to help you help your horses thrive in a human world. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about fats because that's one of the 6 things that we put, or 7 things, if you will, in our horses' mouths. I reviewed this on the last podcast, number 108. So just in a review, there's 6 or 7 things. And the reason I say 6 or 7 is simply put, it depends on what you want to talk about. So let's just pause for a second and see if I can get this. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we're going to be talking about this is so much fun. Okay, fat. The 6 things are: 1, air; 2, water. And these things we aren't even going to discuss because everybody knows that air and water has to go in the horse or they die. 3 are these, we're going to call them, I'm going to change it up from last time. I'm going to call these molecules because they're numerous. There's polyphenols, there's other signaling compounds that we talk about. Is kind of complex, and in the human world, they're just getting after those things. So if we just kind of leave these off to the side and not talk about them right now, because there's really nothing to talk about. Some people are calling these postbiotics, or things that the bacteria are creating, but there's a whole group of things that are going to be critical to your horse's health. And it all comes back down to how you feed your horse. 4 is going to be the minerals. Hope you don't mind my sloppy writing. It's just fine. And some people put vitamins in there at the same time. We're not going to talk about that. So that leaves 5, protein, my favorite, and 6, fats, and 7, sugar. And we've already discussed sugars in the last podcast, and now we're going to be talking about fats. All right? That sets the frame of what we're going after today. And the most important thing to remember is that I'm trying to keep this very simple. Most of you out there, well, all of you out there, hopefully, are horse owners or horse caregivers, or somebody who's responsible for the health of your horse, that you want to help them, again, thrive in a human world. You've thrown them into this life where they're dependent on humans. And unfortunately, most of the humans in this world of horses are trying to make a buck off of you, and they may not be giving you the best advice. And I know this will really anger a lot of people. I can't help it, because the truth is there. After 50 years being with horses, going on 51 this year, that's a lot of years that I've spent with them. And it just is frustrating, because these horses are trying to give what they can, and they're asking for simple return. They want love. They don't want stress. They want companionship, and they want to be fed right. And right now we're on the feeding protocols, and everyone has an idea of how to correctly feed your horse, just like we have an idea how we correctly feed ourselves and our families. But you have to step back and ask yourself the simple question: is what we're doing working? And from my point of view, as an equine dentist who has worked on close to 80,000 horses, it'll be coming up in February, 80,000, if you can believe that. I see the same things happening over and over again, and a lot of them were not in the textbooks in the 1980s. And you could argue that, well, nobody was looking. Well, you only have to lift the lips or open the mouth and peer in with a flashlight, and your eyes can tell most of the pathologies that are in there. And I know lots of veterinarians and horse trainers have been doing this for hundreds of years, and yet they don't see fractured cheek teeth. They don't see these disintegrating and falling apart front teeth that they're calling that fancy word, EOTRH. So there's a lot of things going on out there. We didn't have free fecal water, with the squirts. That's what I call it. We didn't have top lines disappearing, suspensory ligament injuries, tendon injuries, behavioral problems that we need all these fancy, what do you call them? Natural horsemen to tell us how to make a horse, what's the word I'm thinking of? Behave. And in reality, if we change the diet, almost every one of them is going to behave a lot better for us. So anyway, let me move on and talk about fats in a way that tries to make sense. If you recall from the last podcast, and if you didn't listen to the last podcast about sugars, or you haven't listened to me talk about this in the past, or if you haven't gone to thehorsesadvocate.com and read my articles or taken the nutrition course, I'll tell you what they are. There are 3 elements. Now, an element is the atoms. And every one of us who's ever taken a chemistry course back in 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade knows that these elements that are on a chart on the wall called the periodic table of elements are put together in certain ways to make molecules. And the best example is hydrogen. Whoops. Hydrogen is also known as H. That's just the symbol. And oxygen. And that's symbolized by O. And if you take 2 H's and put it together with an O, you have H2O. And that, as we all know, is water. Now, I want to introduce just one more element, and that's called carbon. Now, carbon, if you know anything about carbon, it's black, it's solid, it looks, I don't know, like charcoal. It looks like what's burnt on your meat if you overcook it, or if you cook your cookies too long and they burn, or your toast too long and it becomes black. That's carbon. What you've basically done is you've taken hydrogen and oxygen, which are both gases, and you've heated it to the point where it's boiled off, and all you have left is carbon. That's your burnt toast. That's your burnt sugar. If you heat sugar up, make it liquid, and then it turns into a solid, that's carbon. All of us, all of our horses, every animal on the planet, and the plants too, are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And there's one more, there's more elements, don't get me wrong, but the vast majority is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and another one called nitrogen. Now, nitrogen is interesting because that makes up about 78% of air. And a lot of people think that the air you're breathing is oxygen because everyone says it is. I mean, sorry, Oprah, she's all about O and oxygen, Oprah. And yes, oxygen is necessary, obviously, because it's right up there, oxygen. But nitrogen is also up there because it makes up most proteins. So let's just stop for a second, and we're not going to put a line through this nitrogen because we're not going to talk about that today. We're just going to talk about these 3, CHO. And if you put carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen together in a ring structure is basically all these elements that are put together like a ring. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See how they're all bonded with this little red line? So this isn't a ring. If it was a ring, you could stick your finger through that. And that equals sugar. And this is a repeat of what I did last podcast. And the reason I'm repeating is because my goal is to repeat a lot. I'm trying not to go past a lot of people. I'm dumping, for most, a lot of information into your ears, into your brain, and it's overflowing and spilling out. But if you can listen to the last podcast and then listen to this one and say, oh, yeah, I remember carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a ring is a sugar. It's all I need to hear from you. But if you do carbon, 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 carbon in a string, in a line, these are fats. And they basically have hydrogens off of them and oxygens. And they put these hydrogens all along here. And I'm just drawing, if you're just listening to this, I want you to envision a string of carbons, kind of like pearls on a necklace, if you will. And off of each pearl, not that everybody has a pearl necklace, I want you to put on each side of it. Like if you are the carbon and your feet and your head are attached to two more carbons, and on the end of your arms that are outstretched, you've got a hydrogen on each side. And if every one of your hands is holding a hydrogen, we're going to call that a saturated fat. Okay, saturated fats means that the carbon chain is loaded up with hydrogens. Now, if I take one hydrogen off and I'm erasing one, okay, I've just erased it here on the board. And now, of all the possibilities of hydrogens being attached to the carbons, there's one that has that's missing. All right. So now I have to put a double bond there, and we're going to call that a mono unsaturated. So if saturated is like you can't put any more hydrogens on it, that's what it means by saturated. But if you take off one hydrogen off of this, your body recognizes that. It's a very big, very strong signal, and it's called a monounsaturated fatty acid. All fats are called fatty acids, okay? So that's just what we call it. So a mono, whoops, let me just rewrite that. A mono unsaturated fatty acid is abbreviated MUFA, MUFA, and you're going to hear me call those MUFAs. So I'll put apostrophe S. MUFAs, monounsaturated fatty acids. And let me give you an example of monounsaturated fatty acids. All oils that come from fruit, olive oil, avocado oil, and coconut oil. Those are monounsaturated fatty acids. And what's really unique about them and helpful is that they're non-inflammatory. So that's what it means by monounsaturated fatty acids. Now I'm going to go back up to my diagram, and I know you guys can't see this if you're just listening, but I'm going to take away another. So I'm going to take 2 out of here, all right? And I'm going to put 2 double bonds there. So now we have a carbon that has lost 2 hydrogens. And if it's lost 2 or more hydrogens, this is so simple. It's called a poly. Poly means many. Polyunsaturated. Okay? Fatty acid. So we call that a PUFA, P-U-F-A. And PUFAs are interesting. PUFAs are basically your seed oils. They are liquid at any temperature. Corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, you name it. All these seed oils that are liquid are called PUFAs. And there's a place for them, but they shouldn't be added to your diet. And the reason for it is really simple. And I want to talk about something called a lipopolysaccharide. So lipopolysaccharide is also called, let me put this in green so it'll set apart, LPS, lipopolysaccharide. All right. So if you're driving along or mucking your stalls and you're trying to get bored, I would just want you to think of LPS. And I'm going to borrow an expression from Stephen Gundry, MD, who's written several books on lectins called The Plant Paradox. He was a former president of the American Heart Association, former cardiac surgeon who's big on diet changes and helping us prevent heart disease. And he calls LPSs, are you ready? If you're mucking stalls, this will be so good. Look down at that pile, all right? He calls them little pieces of shit. And sorry, but this is a horse. We're all in the barn together. If that offends you, I apologize. Please, I'm trying to help people remember things, and LPSs is just something that is exactly that. When you look at fecal material that comes out of the rear end of your horse, in humans, I don't know about horses, but in humans, 60%, that's 60% of the poop is dead bacteria, because bacteria are constantly dying in our gut and they have to be swept out or replaced with new ones. That's because bacteria are constantly reproducing. And the fact that I learned the other day from a gastroenterologist was that if you have one bacteria today, that one bacteria in 24 hours is going to represent 1,000 bacteria. That's how rapidly they multiply. And with that high rate of growth, you're also going to get a high rate of death. And these dead bacteria come out, and they're called lipopolysaccharide. And if you notice the word lipo like liposuction, that means fat. And saccharide, if you remember from our other podcast, saccharide is another name for sugar. And poly just means many. So this is basically the outer shell of these dead bacteria that are made up of both fats and sugars, and they're called lipopolysaccharides. And what's really interesting is they have found that lipopolysaccharides plus PUFAs form a compound that can go through, I'm just going to introduce this word, tight junctions. Now, this is really, really, really fascinating. So, I mean, you're learning a lot about fats, but not in the stepwise fashion that I thought I was going to teach it to you, and in the way that it might make sense to you. But boy, when these little juicy tidbits come along, I just want you to grab them, because with these juicy tidbits, you're going to learn about why your horses should not be fed PUFAs. All right. The cell lining of your gut, remember, if you go back, your gut is a tube that runs through you, starts at your mouth, and food goes in, and out comes what you're picking up in the stall, what we call poop. Okay. And we talked about how during the digestive process, things come through that are supposed to come through, such as sugars, fats, and proteins that help build and maintain and power this mechanism called the body. All right. So just think of your body, or your horse's body is no different than a vehicle. And the vehicle will just sit there and will decay over time. The tires will rot. The windshield wipers will rot. Over time, if it just sits there long enough, the skin will rot, the fabric will rot, the plastic eventually will degrade. And 1,000 years from now, you've got a pile of dust. So how do you prevent that from happening? Well, you maintain it, you clean it, you keep the dirty chemicals off of it, you rotate the tires, and of course, you add fuel so you actually drive it so the vehicle has a purpose for at least 5 to 10 or more years before it finally gives up the ghost. All right, so you have to be feeding it fuel. Unfortunately, if you feed it the wrong fuels, things will happen. Just like if you try to put gasoline in a diesel engine, or if you put a little bit of water in the fuel, these engines aren't going to work. They're just going to go cough, sputter, and some black smoke, and all sorts of bad things. And what this lipopolysaccharides bound to the PUFAs do is they come through this system through what's called a tight junction. So this thin blue line that I've drawn here, I know you can't see it if you're not watching, but this thin blue line is called epithelium. Epithelium. And it is one cell thick. And that's really important and mystifying and mind-boggling, because everything that's inside this bowel, in what they call the lumen, which is the inside part, is kept from coming into our body by a very selective one cell thick layer of cells. Now, if you look at your skin or your horse's skin, you know that it has no chance of surviving high velocity objects or very sharp objects, knives and bullets. Okay, we get that. But it does a pretty good job of us falling down, and we get a little bit of a scrape, and it immediately heals, and it works pretty well. If you keep it clean, keep the bacteria out, everything's fine. But that's multiple skin layers, especially where you have calluses. It'll become thicker and protect yourself. But inside the lining of your gut, you only have one cell, and each cell is glued together next to another cell, next to another cell, next to another cell. And some of these cells have specific purposes, and we're not going to get into that. But in essence, they all are connected with something called a tight junction. And this is glue. And this glue area is impenetrable. All right. So these tight junctions are impenetrable if they're not inflamed. But if you get the right combination of stuff, they can dissolve that. And it turns out that these LPSs and PUFAs can dissolve this. I'm going to draw an arrow from our LPS through the tight junctions, and they're going to come through and pass through into the body. So this is the body here. And what's interesting is in humans, and again, I'm going to say in humans so many times because there are so many, there's so much more information in humans, obviously, because there's more money to research it. Don't get me started. But the bottom line is, they say that 70%, 70, that's almost 3/4 of your immune system, immune system lies on the other side of this gut wall. 70%. Why? Because when things come through, you want to attack it and get rid of it. So there are so many inflammatory ingredients coming through and creating leaky gut. For instance, lectins. Lectins are proteins that plants make that try to get you sick. For instance, gluten from wheat in many people will come through this body wall and cause inflammation and make the people with celiac disease very sick and stress their immune system. But what they found out in humans is when these lipopolysaccharides bind up with the polyunsaturated fatty acids, they create a molecule that goes here. And guess what? Where it goes? You ready? Joints. And they have found these polyunsaturated fatty acids and lipopolysaccharide complexes in joints, which cause aches and pain. And it's so interesting because some of my clients who have learned about this and take away all the polyunsaturated fatty acids from their horses, especially the older ones that are a little bit creaky out there, they start running around like 2-year-olds. And the owners are so amazed that they start looking for PUFAs in their diet and they eliminate them. And all of a sudden, they're realizing that their joint pain goes. And here I am at 70, and I don't have any joint pain, which is just a blessing because I don't eat any PUFAs. So, what are some of the PUFAs? Well, I mentioned soybean oil. Now, to make soybean meal, you have to remove the soybean oil. Cornmeal, the oil has to be removed. Canola meal, the canola oil has to be removed. Cottonseed, they take the oil out. Flaxseed oil, flaxseed, they take the oil out. So all the meals are basically the oils have been removed. And so these manufacturers have these gallons, these barrels of oil. And guess what they do with them? They sell them. And when you get your wonderfully crisp French fries at a lot of these stores, you'll see that they've been cooked in soybean oil. Now, there's a bunch of times when they said, oh, they've been cooked in trans fats. And we're not going to get into trans fats because I think trans fats have been basically taken off the market. They're not PUFAs, they're not MUFAs, they're a little bit different. I don't want to talk about it. I just want to talk about the PUFAs because PUFAs are in every horse food. And why do you find PUFAs, soybean meal, canola oil, vegetable oil, corn oil? Why do you find them in these feed mixes? Well, I didn't know it until I talked to a guy who actually makes horse feed. He's a small independent feed manufacturer. And he says, well, it's obvious. It lubricates the machines. And he says, basically, if you've ever cooked anything in the kitchen and you're throwing everything in the mixer, it starts the effort. You can hear the motor strain as it's trying to mix all these ingredients. And you add a little vegetable oil in there, and all of a sudden the thing picks up its pace because now it's being lubricated. And he says you have to add a lubricant. So when you pick up a package of anything at a convenience store, my son just picked up something at a local convenience store, and it looked healthy. But when you looked at it, it was loaded with peanut oil and canola oil, and I think there's one other oil in it. And these are all seed oils and are inflammatory. And I won't touch them. I know my body really well. And again, I don't want to have any joint pain at all. I want to never have joint pain. And so I don't eat these things. So here we are talking about the types of saturated, monounsaturated, the MUFAs, and the polyunsaturated PUFAs. And already you know that there's a difference in these oils. And oils are fats, right? So what else do we want to talk about in fats? That's one of those tidbits I just wanted to bring to your attention. Oh, I love this one. The omegas, the mega fatty acids, FAs. Okay, omega fatty acids. And we know that there's an omega-3, we're just going to call it O3, and the omega 3s and the omega-6s. And we talk about the omega-3s are good, the omega-6s are inflammatory. Well, the truth of the matter is they are both required in our bodies to survive. So it's the ratio of omega-6s to omega-3s. And because of that, in the human studies, they are dumping fish oil as a solution. And the fish oil is supposed to be high in omega-3s, and you increase this ratio, and it's supposed to make your life wonderful. And okay, but horses aren't humans, and I've yet to see a horse eat a fish. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, where does a horse get its omega-3s and omega-6s? And now I don't read everything. You know, there's so much information out there, and most of the information that's out there is I'm going to call it kind of garbage, but it's just too, I don't have an answer yet. But I thought what I'd try and do is tell you what the difference is between omega-3 and omega-6. So I'm going to make you guys all a little bit of a chemistry nerd. Okay. So remember, I said a fat is carbons in a string, right? There's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6, there's 7, there's 8. Okay. I'm just going to put 8 for now. So there's something called the Greek alphabet, which is not the American alphabet, may not be the alphabet that you have. But in the Greek alphabet, which chemists use a lot, you have the first carbon, which they call the alpha, and you have the last carbon, which is called the omega, alpha, omega. All right. Now, you probably are saying, okay, I get it. There's omega. You're right. The omega is the last carbon in a long string. Now, what's really interesting is if two carbons have what's called a double bond. So instead of having just, if you're holding somebody with one hand, that's called a single bond. But if you're dancing with them and you hold them with two hands, that's called a double bond. Okay. So if you count back 3 carbons, 1, 2, 3, and put a double bond, now you have an omega-3 fatty acid. Pretty cool, huh? That's what omega-3 fatty acid is. Now, if your first double bond is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all right? And that's where your first double bond is. That's called an omega-6. Now you are officially organic chemists. I don't want to get you all scared. But that's the difference between omega-3 and omega-6. It's where the first double bond is. And when I heard that, it helped me organize in my brain what the heck these omega-6 and omega-3 things. If you recall from the last podcast, when starch is converted into cellulose, so cellulose is glucose and then bonded to an upside down glucose, bonded to a right side up glucose, bonded to upside down, an upside down glucose. All right, etc. So glucose upside down, right side up, upside down, right side up, upside down. That's cellulose. And we said that no animal on the planet can digest cellulose, but bacteria can. And bacteria digests it into short chain fatty acids. And we said that that was acetate, acetic acetate, TATE. And I goofed on my last podcast. I corrected it in the video, but it's a propionate. So I'm correcting it here. And butyrate. Now, these are basically 3 to 4 carbon lengths long. And butyrate is also known now as a postbiotic. And the reason it's called a postbiotic is because bacteria make it. So they're given a substrate, cellulose, and they digest it into butyrate. And the butyrate is protective. And that's its number one job. It basically protects the one cell layer of epithelial cells by helping create a mucin, which is a thick covering that the bacteria will live in and thrive in and keep everything inside the lumen except things that need to diffuse into the body, such as hydrogen, oxygen, and carbon. So it's a postbiotic and it's protective. Now, that's a short chain fatty acid. A medium chain fatty acid is also called MCT, where T equals triglyceride. And MCT oil, maybe you've heard of. A lot of people like to add MCT oil to their food because these are medium chain, which means they're about, I'm guessing, 6 to 12 carbons long. And what I do for myself every morning is I add an 8-carbon chain, 8 carbons long, called caprylic. I say maybe it's a Y, I don't know, caprylic acid, to my coffee every day, which is sold as brain octane. And what happens is this can be converted into ketones, and that fuels the brain. So we call it brain food. So we can be low on our sugar, and yet our brain is happy because it's running on ketones. So it's not going to stress the system and say, hey, give me more sugar. So that's kind of cool. So those are medium chain triglycerides. And then you have long chain, which are greater than 12. So, 13 plus. And this is where you're getting the EPA and the DHA. And they can get as long as 27, 28 carbons lengths. And it's a whole science, and it's way beyond my pay grade. And I assume your pay grade too. If you're smart and you understand all these things, let me know. And come on the show and give us a more detailed picture of this. I'm not going to try and hide anything. I'm not saying that I'm expert at this, but I do have one major question. Okay? One major question. And it's simply this. How do horses get medium chain, and long chain fatty acids? All right, how do they get them? Because if they're eating nothing but ground plants and they're converting their cellulose into short chain fatty acids, I just assume that they have a process of adding carbons to the short chains to make their medium and long chain fatty acids, because I've yet to see a horse pour salad dressing or olive oil on their food. I have yet to see them eat fatty meat or fish. I mean, all they're doing is a strict herbivore diet, and they're obligate vegetarians, obligate vegans. So, how do horses get, I can't spell, get medium chain and long chain fatty acids? And I don't know, but I know horses do it. I know they get them. And this is why I don't worry about fat in my horses. I never worry about adding fat to their food. So many people will take oils and add them to their diet to improve their hair coat. That is it's insane. And you can say, oh, but the hair coat shines after you do this. Okay, I'm not going to argue with you, but it's not making for a healthy hair coat. It may be oozing the fat out, so it shines a little bit, but the horse's hair coat is not healthy. And horses don't need that vegetable oil. And I suggest that it may be causing damage to the joints. And so I avoid fats like the plague. And I know that there's a lot of fat supplements out there, both in oils and fat added to grains. I just don't see the purpose of it. I don't see any evidence that it's good. I know that right now everyone's on the bandwagon for getting our horses to have omega-3s, and they say that's going to be anti-inflammatory. Well, get rid of all the inflammatory ingredients. That's probably the number one thing you should do to get rid of gut inflammation and inflammation in the joints and the muscles. That's going to be the best thing you can do. So fats are, they're important, but I'm not making a big deal out of it. Horses do just fine. So I just want to go one step further and talk about fatty acids. And fatty acids are just a length of carbons with hydrogens and oxygens attached. And they are stored energy. So think about this for a second. The excess sugar that a body gets is being converted by the liver into fatty acids. So it's stored energy. It's put in for future use. It's not burned, it's stored. And to store fat, you take a glycerol molecule, I'll just call it GLYC, and you put on a fatty acid here, and a fatty acid here, and a fatty acid here. So I've just drawn a circle of glycerin, and there's 3 fatty acids attached, okay? And that is what is called a triglyceride. And triglycerides are really good at being efficient in stacking inside a fat cell. You can cram a bunch of triglycerides, and the triglycerides can be released and flow through the blood. And they usually hop a ride with something called cholesterol. Whoops, cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol. And I want you to think of a cholesterol as a shipping container. All right, and I'm sure you've seen a bunch of shipping containers either on a truck, or you see them stacked at the shipyard coming off the boat. And inside this shipping container are these triglycerides. I just am putting the letter T in here. And also fatty acids, because fatty acids go separately as well. But the point is, if you've ever tried to mix oil and water together, you can put it in a glass jar, shake it up hard, and they're all bubbles. And then they finally separate. Given enough time, the fat and water will separate out. We all have seen that. We all understand that. Well, your blood, the horse's blood, is mostly water. It's very aqueous. And if you try to put fat in there, they will float around and get trapped and caught in little nooks and crannies, and it'll never get to its destination. So they put them in a shipping container called cholesterol. And that shipping container goes down the blood to the cells. And then when it hits the cells, now these things can escape into the cell. So as one person said, if you want to send a bunch of towels over to another continent across an ocean, do you just throw them in the water, or do you put them in a container? I thought that was something that just stuck with me, because yeah, the fat will never get there. It'll just disperse and float around and get stuck. And no, you want shipping containers. So our bodies, mammals' bodies, make cholesterol to grab these. And of course, you have different size cholesterol molecules. You have, let me change this. You have, where is it? High HDL, high density lipoproteins, lipoprotein, high density HIGH. This is a disaster. DENSITY. Okay, high density lipoprotein. You have low density lipoprotein, and you have very low density lipoprotein. And the reason why we know all this is they took the cholesterol and threw it in a centrifuge and spun it, and they found that there were different densities. And each one has a little bit of different purpose. And unfortunately, many years ago, somebody said that the low density was the bad, and the good density or the high density was the good. And subsequently, they found that this was dead wrong, and you need to eliminate this. because cholesterol isn't bad. It's not bad at all. In fact, what it is the particle size. Particle size. And you have different particle sizes of what's inside here. And basically, if you have a beach ball versus a golf ball, the golf ball is denser than the beach ball. And if you threw both of them in the pool, the golf ball would sink and the large beach ball would float. Well, with the low density, with a small particle size, these things can actually stick to vessel walls, and that can start the plaque formation. And this is what's leading to your atherosclerosis in humans. Whereas if you have large particle sizes in your low LDL, they won't stick. They just boop, bounce off. So that's up for discussion for people who are in the human medical world, if you want to. We're just not seeing this as a problem in horses because their diet is basically made out of forage, which, if anything, they just collect too much sugar and it goes in as body fat and it stays there. It doesn't come out because they keep eating sugar and then they get insulin resistant. And then all the problems of high sugar diets come in, but we don't really see a horse on a high fat diet unless, of course, you start to starve a horse. Now, I don't have a lot of experience in this. And again, I would love to have somebody who's into medicine come in. But if you put a horse on a strict diet, or even a human on a strict diet, you can increase your triglycerides and you can increase your fat in the blood. And you can actually collect blood and you can see fat accumulation in it. And these are life-threatening. So you have to be careful. If you're on a strict fat diet and you mobilize the fat quickly, rapidly, you can have high blood values of fat, and that can be life-threatening. So we don't want to do that. But that's pretty rare in horses. I just haven't seen it. But of course, people in universities get to see stuff like that. And maybe out in some populations where horses get starved, but not here. Okay, so I think I've covered fat pretty well. And I don't want to spend too much more time talking about this. So let me stop sharing the screen and come back to you here. And we're just about at an hour. And hopefully you've learned that sugar and fats are important. In horses, the sugar, it comes in from basically the starch and the free sugars in plants. But the cellulose is where they get their fat from. And that's what causes, or that's what creates this excess energy. I shouldn't say excess, the needed energy, especially in the wintertime, to do their job. So I think that pretty much covers fats for now. And I don't want to overwhelm you with any more information. Just hang in there and we'll cover proteins in the next podcast. Thanks, guys.
Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.